Today I'm going to be talking about notation in music, so dots as we might call them. Now just before we get into that, it's very important, as I've mentioned in previous videos on the subject of how music is written, to have an equal respect for whatever system people happen to use. The key about it is communication and ease of communication, hopefully. So as I've said previously, there's lots of people who think reading music makes them superior in some way, and there's probably an even bigger group of people who think not reading music makes them superior in some ways. Complete madness in my view. It's helpful to use your ear, it's helpful to use tablature, and it's helpful to be able to read music. One of the reasons for this is imagine being able to get inside the mind of Bach or Mozart or Paganini, the what you might call the shredding violinist from a few hundred years ago. You can actually read what they thought of, what they composed. You're actually inside their head. You can get exactly how they're thinking, everything else. Fantastically useful resource. Now, to be able to access that, you need to be able to read dots. So that's one good reason. As a kid, I always remember struggling with sheet music. I used to go on this quite long and laborious journey by bus to the nearest music shop to get the sheet music to whatever my favourite song was at that particular time. And I'd get home and the chords were inadequately written, even wrong in some cases. I spent a few months trying to work out how to play a misprint at one point. So reading music was very useful because actually I could look at the right hand part of the piano and work out what the actual real chord voicing should have been. So that was another use for it. But anyway, down to brass tacks. So reading music should be about communication. And one of the first things that people do is to remove a very obvious piece of communication. So the example I'm going to give you now is I'm going to show you a stave, which is a group of 5 lines, and it has next to it a thing called a treble clef, a squiggly line, which tells us that in terms of a piano, it's broadly speaking looking at the right hand half of that keyboard, so the higher notes, if you will, and that's where guitar music's written. So the first thing I got taught was every good boy deserves favour, which was the lines, and face. Now, that seemed to me rather odd. I thought, well, what's all that about? I think it might have been better just to rely on something a lot more simple and something I'd known for years before that particular lesson. And that's your alphabet. Now, if you know your alphabet, as far as G, you're in business. Okay, so what I'm going to say to you is actually very, very simple. You might say almost deceptively simple, but that's really all there is to it. Okay, if we look at a treble clef and the stave next to it, you'll see lines and spaces between those lines. So if we look at the second space up from the bottom, that happens to be A. Okay. Now, as we go from line to space, we go through another letter of the alphabet. So as we go up, we go A on the space, B on the line, C on the space, D, E, F and G, which is on the space above the top line. So that's what this looks like. Very easy. A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And what about football and faces and stuff? If we go the other way, in other words, we go lower in pitch, so we go from the A on that second space down to the line beneath it, we go back down to G, and from that point, reverse alphabetically. Now this is all to do with octaves, and I've done a video on octaves and how they work on the guitar and how they can help you find notes and all sorts. So if you're not sure about octaves, it's worth a quick look. But just to save you leaving this particular video at this point, that's an octave. There we go. So each time we get to 8 notes, we come back to where we started effectively. So, okay, second space is A, the line beneath it is G, then F, then E on the bottom line, then D underneath that bottom line. So that's pretty straightforward, I think. Now, as you will have gathered, that doesn't really give us a very big range of notes. So what we have in addition to our 5-line stave are what are known as ledger lines, and these are temporary extensions above or below that stave. Now this is to avoid having a system where you've got so many lines you can't tell what's going on. And it's like any system, it's not perfect, it's probably the best way to organise that in this particular format. So if we go above the stave, we've already got a G sitting on that space above the top line. We add a ledger line in and we put a note there, that becomes A. Okay, that happens to correspond to. Now we'll talk more about that in a moment, but if we want to then go to the B, which is above that A, we still need to put in the ledger line to tell us, otherwise it's just going to look like a G we've written a long way from the stave. So first ledger line A, above the first ledger line B, C is on the second ledger line, D on the space above the second ledger line, and 3 ledger lines up we come to an E. Okay, now the same thing happens at the bottom end of the stave as well. That's really, I think, all you need to worry about when it comes to reading dots. Okay, there are various other bits and pieces, but that's the principle of it. If we want a sharp, it has a sharp written next to it. If we want a flat, it has a flat written next to it. If we want to repeatedly play particular notes, sharp or flat, then they're written in what's known as the key signature at the beginning of the piece of music. So it will have a flat, let's say on the B line, and that tells us every time we play a B, we should play it flat. Okay. Now, I'm going to make that it for this particular video because there's a little bit there to take in, and it's worth just having a little look back over some of the graphics to get yourself comfortable with them. In part 2, we're going to look at where the guitar strings correspond to the dots on that stave. Thanks for watching, and if you could hit the subscribe button, that would be great. As ever, any questions, please send them over, and anything you want me to explain, by all means ask. Okay, thanks a lot for watching. Bye for now.